Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Soul Symphony. Thank you for tuning into my channel. My name is Z. I hope the information you find here helps you if you're on your healing journey. If you're not on one, that's okay too. So today I'll go over guilt. Guilt is, again, sometimes a normal feeling when we have done something that we're not supposed to do. We can feel inappropriate feelings of why have I done that. It's almost like a remorse, right? Almost like a remorse, but it's not necessarily a remorse. Just feeling that bad for what we have done. It's a feeling of an action that was done, right? That was deemed inappropriate or deemed not necessarily good, right? So we have to see it that way, but sometimes there is guilt that is associated to trauma, and that's a different type of guilt, and it's a painful and emotional response to trauma. It's a response to trauma where a survival actually feels responsible for the trauma that has happened to them. They feel like what happened to them actually was their fault, and it's not a core feeling like shame, but it's more like that action happened because it's my fault. If I have done this, if I have done that, it wouldn't have happened. If I have something as simple as people pleasing, right? We actually learn sometimes to be people pleasers from traumatic events. From traumatic events that taught us that if we learn to do things the way people want us to do it, then we will not be hurt, right? So when it comes to guilt, it's something similar, but it's on the other side. It's more like if I have done something different, I wouldn't have been hurt in that trauma. It's not, okay, let me do something different so I don't get hurt. It's more like if I have done something different, if I have acted this way, if I have acted that way, it's my fault. It's my actions that actually trigger that trauma for happening. If I have not done A, B, C, D, I wouldn't have received this trauma. I wouldn't have been hurt. I wouldn't have been abused, right? But we have to be mindful. Sometimes also it can be linked to post-traumatic stress. It can very much be linked to post-traumatic stress because of the association with the event and our actions. And we tend to see there is a correlation between those two when technically there is nothing. There is no correlation. If we have done something, that person will still have hurt us. If we have not done something, that person will still have hurt us. But in the case of guilt and post-traumatic stress, those two are linked because we see that the event has happened to us because it's our fault. We have done something to trigger that event. And because of that, we can unfortunately stay in a loop of reliving the same thing over and over and over and over, almost like a regretful event, right? If I have done this, then this wouldn't have happened. So we stay in that guilt/regret. But even though it's not really our fault, people will do what they will do. If we want it, we don't want it, they will still do what they will do. We cannot control people's actions. They're responsible for their own actions, not us. So we have to see it that way. And then it triggers the mind into false blame. So we blame ourselves. And when that outcomes was completely outside of our personal control, we could not do nothing about it. So at the end of the day, we have to be mindful that there is nothing sometimes we could have done to prevent somebody from abusing us. There's absolutely nothing. And if we have that kind of mindset, we can understand easily how not to fall into that self-blame, into that guilt, into that also people pleasing. Because after that trauma, unfortunately, even if we heal that part of the trauma, that guilt of not feeling that it's our fault anymore, right? We can tend to probably fall into that people pleasing mentality by trying to avoid any future events similar to that one trauma that we have sustained. So we can probably heal completely the guilt, but what we have to also be mindful to heal is the control aspect of it. We cannot control people. We cannot control if somebody else will decide to try to inflict similar trauma to us in the future. We cannot control that too. We can only control us. We cannot control other people. We cannot control their actions. So we have to be mindful that what people do, they do it because they do it. Because that's their actions, not ours. Because we cannot really control what they do. So therefore, if we do not heal our control, our need for control, we do not heal our feeling of guilt, right, for what have happened to us in the past, we can go into people pleasing because we will try to put our own needs and feelings and wants in the back burner to satisfy other people so that other people can actually align to us. So, or we can align to other people, even though that's not really what we want. We still will force things to align, even though it's not aligned. So we have to be mindful, especially in relationships. In relationships, especially, we tend to stay and stick around people or stick with partners that are not necessarily aligned to us, not good to us, because we try our very best to make things good. We try to make them feel good, make them feel wanted, make them feel adequate, make them feel any and everything is about them, not about us. So the guilt portion of it can not only push us into people pleasing eventually in life, or in time it can, but not only with family members or with people who have even abused us, right? But with also our partners. So we have to be mindful of that. Now there are a couple types of guilt that I will go and just talk about, maybe one or two of them, right? We have the survival guilt, where the person actually believes that they feel guilty for surviving the event. They feel guilty that they have lived a situation, but other people did not. Especially in the case of mass casualties. For example, mass casualties were maybe an accident, in a car accident, for example, right? Car accident where multiple people were in the car and that one person is the only one who survived the accident. There's the survival's guilt, where we feel like, why was I the only one who survived? Especially if that person have seen those corpses on there, right? After the accident, the corpses have been probably, I would say, deformed, right? And that can be a very traumatic visual event, very traumatic visually. So therefore we tend to, that can also trigger PTSD, because we can see that event over and over and over. And it's not even them surviving only, it's them also reliving the situation by seeing that same event over and over and over, and seeing those corpses there, in those particular, I would say, those particular forms or those particular shapes and places, right? So we have to be mindful that it's not only guilt. Sometimes there are so many different types of guilt. It depends on the trauma that we have sustained. Now, the survival guilt is not only, we have accidents, we have certain disasters like natural disasters, tornadoes. We have so many different ones that I can talk about, but I'm just going to go over it a little bit. And then we have also the false responsibility. We feel responsible. For example, we internalize the blame for the abuse. We internalize it, and we neglect or family dysfunction, and as a child, and we can think that it's actually our fault. We're responsible for it. We have to fix it. We have to be able to do certain things to fix it, especially once a child grows up in that family. And then sometimes that's again where that child can actually turn into parenting their own parents, right? Turning into the parent for their own parents, especially if they grew up in families, or I would say if they grew up with parents that were abusing certain substances, right? For example, alcoholic parents or they take illicit substances. So therefore they can grow up being the ones who are parenting their own parents, because their parents are too out of their own, I would say, natural state to be able to sit down and think and function and parent properly. So the child sometimes is the one that who be there cooking, cleaning, sometimes even I would say cleaning their own parents' vomit, doing all kind of stuff that a child has no business doing. So we have to be mindful. And then that's the false responsibility. The child grows up feeling responsible for their parents, for having to not only take care of their parents as a child, but when they grow up later on in life, they feel like they're responsible for financially taking care of their parents too, even though their parents are adults who should be able to work for themselves. At some point in time, at least they should be able to. Now I understand that we all eventually get old, right? And then sometimes we have disabilities as we get older that can stop us, or that can be on the way of being able to work. But again, the child will grow up feeling like they're responsible for that too at some point in time. And not just some point in time, actually, since they're a little child, they feel like I'm responsible for my mom and dad. I have to make sure that they have food, they have shelter, they have a place to stay, they have money, they have this, they have that. And that child can grow up being, unfortunately, working overachievers sometimes, because not only overachievers, but workaholics, because not only they have to take care of their own responsibilities, but they have to take care of other people's responsibilities who should be taking care of their own selves, right? Now, I understand, again, as parents, there will be a place and time in life where we would not be able to take care of ourselves eventually. But if we work our entire lives, right, we'll be able to have savings, we'll be able to have certain benefits, right? Governmental benefits, certain things that will be able to actually sustain us in our old age, to be able to retire without having to put all that responsibility on our children. So, but a child who grows up with guilt, the false responsibility, the type of guilt that they feel guilty that if they eat and their parents don't eat, therefore they're a bad person. Or it's not that they're a bad person, it's more like their actions. Because when it comes to a bad person, that's more like shame. And sometimes they can go hand in hand too, because they will feel like, I'm a bad person, my parents are not eating, I'm eating. Or I have this big house, my parents live in a tiny little room in a nursing home, right? But again, which I'm not saying not to help our parents. Absolutely, if we have it, we can do it. We should help them. But we should not be put in a certain situation where we have to be the sole responsible for any and everything. And it shouldn't be something that since childhood, it started since childhood, right? It shouldn't. It should be more like, hey, I know that my parents don't have it, I'm gonna do my best to help. Okay, right? It shouldn't be like, hey, I have to find 4, 5, 6 different jobs to be able to help my parents, right? Because sometimes they have to be able to help a little bit too, especially if they have physically they're capable, right? Why not? But one person being the one doing everything, I think that's not a fair game at all, right? And then also we have the hindsight bias, which is judging. It's more like a judging past survival choices, using information that only known after the event. Now, we did not really have the information prior to the event. We only had it after the event. So therefore, we judging our past choices. We feel guilty that we did not choose right. We did not do right. We did not, because guilt is associated with actions. So sometimes we do certain actions, right? We do certain actions without really having all the facts. And because we don't have all the facts, we are more likely to make mistakes. And sometimes they can be life-changing events, life-changing mistakes that we cannot go back in time and fix. And that kind of guilt can be devastating, especially when we did not have all the facts and then we just made a decision. And that decision is what will affect us probably for the rest of our lives, right? That's one of the reasons it's very important for us when we are making certain decisions to try to look for the facts, not just she said, he said, they said, right? That's one of the very important part in life, to be able to, again, using our discernment is one of it, but discernment is still not facts. Being able to use our best judgment is still not facts, right? Because discernment is our best judgment. Our best judgment, depending on what we see outside of us. But again, what we see outside of us, sometimes people can trick us into thinking that what we see outside of us is actually the right thing, right? And the other thing also I would say is to be mindful that being guilty is not necessarily the same as being guilty in the court system, right? Being guilty, when we say being guilty here, is more like a moral compass. Is the guilt associated to our own moral compass? We feeling like we have violated certain things within our own morals, our own values, and therefore that guilt can actually be very hidden, very devastating, and it can hinder us from thinking properly. It can hinder us from doing a lot of things. It can hinder us from self-blame, because it can hinder us from literally blaming ourselves constantly, that if I have done this, if I have done that, if I have not done this, if I have not done that. But at the end of the day, understanding that the self-blame is not something that will take us in any place that we need to be. It will only keep us behind. It will only hinder us. It will only make sure that actually we do not progress in life. We do not progress to get to our goals. So being in the self-blame loop is very detrimental when it comes to guilt. So that's one of the biggest things for us to be mindful of: self-blame. Blaming ourselves over and over about what happened is not necessarily where we should stay, because again, at the end of the day, what happened. The best thing to ever do is to be able to look forward, to keep going, and to make new rules. Maybe tell ourselves, hey, we have learned from this. Now my new things, my new rules, or my new actions, right? I will make sure that I apply the lesson I have learned in the past through this specific event that has happened. And then I'll make sure that I'll do my best to prevent future things from happening. Now, it's not about, again, control, because there are a lot of things we cannot control in life. It's more like to understand actually that certain things happen no matter what we do. Certain things are meant to happen. They're meant to happen maybe for us to learn a lesson, because what's ahead of us is so much more important. That what's ahead of us is so important that we cannot actually afford to make a mistake similar to a previous one, right? So therefore, about us learning that one lesson, it becomes a building block for us not to make bigger mistakes. Because sometimes there are certain mistakes, when we do them in life, we cannot go back. We cannot go back. We cannot go back. We cannot go forward. We will be stuck. When I say stuck, I mean stuck for life, right? So we have to be mindful. Sometimes the small mistakes that we have happened in the past, which I'm not saying traumatic events, right? They're mistakes sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're absolutely not mistakes. Sometimes the people who put us through that trauma don't know better themselves. So therefore, technically, they are mistakes for them, right? But it's still not an excuse for them to put us through the trauma. That's one of the reasons it's important for us to heal. Because when we heal, we do not go and inflicting trauma to other people, because we understand that in the first place, before even we start the healing journey, we understand that this is abnormal. This is abnormal. It is not normal. So for us to heal it, we have the tendency to go back to normalcy. That's the reason. we need to go in our healing journey, because there is not one person on this planet Earth who will say that they do not have trauma. Now, we all have trauma. It can be small, it can be tiny, it can be tiny, it can be small, it can be medium, it can be huge, it can be ginormous, right? We all have it. It doesn't matter. It can be something as simple as, hey, somebody laughed at you at school because your hair looks certain way, right? It can be something as small. It's not. We all have something. Some people have went through several traumatic events. Some people have never had a break in their life. They have trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma, right? Some people, they had one tiny trauma when they were kids, and then that was it, right? Some people, okay, they had one little trauma when they were a kid, and then nothing until maybe they married somebody who was, I don't know, who came with their own trauma. Now they brought their trauma to that person, right? One or two trauma, and then so on. Or a friend, right? Sometimes our trauma is not even our trauma. Sometimes people bring their trauma to us, right? Sometimes people bring their trauma to us. That's the sad part about the reality of trauma, right? But if we heal our trauma, that stops that loop. That stops the loop of us taking it to somebody else, and that person taking it to somebody else, and then so on, and then so on, and then so on. So it stopped that perpetuation of traumatic events from one person to the next, and so on. It stops that. So the next thing for sure is to make sure that we understand isolation, because guilt comes with isolation. Guilt, because we feel so guilty about something that happened, especially if it happened within friends or friend group or family members, right? It happened in front of everybody. Now we tend to want to isolate ourselves. We do not want to communicate with other people. We feel unworthy of happiness sometimes. We feel unworthy of being sociable or other people really pouring their love into us. Sometimes it can be very much extenuating into other things. It's not just the guilt, right? It's linked to other things too. Now, worse than PTSD is another one for sure for us to be able to understand that. Like I was mentioning earlier, it can be also linked to PTSD, because when we feel guilty, or it can be linked to traumatic events, not only the survival's remorse can be also linked to PTSD. And then the flashbacks, the worsening PTSD, the flashbacks and of the PTSD can actually be worse over time. Because if we stay in that guilt mentality, it can worsen the PTSD. Not only it can worsen the PTSD, it can worsen all the other associated, I would say, disorders that come with PTSD, such as anxiety, depression, physical tension, right? The flashbacks, the insomnia, and all the other things that come with it, the aggressiveness sometimes, or irritability. So there are so many things that come with PTSD that can also worsen. It's not only the PTSD that can worsen. So if we don't treat the guilt, we can end up isolated. We can end up, again, self-blaming all the time about this and that and that. Again, that self-blame comes with self-criticism. We're criticizing ourselves all the time because, oh, it's my fault, it's this, it's that. The negative thought processes, the negative talk that we have, all these voices in our head telling us how bad we did this and we did that. And then on top of that isolation, we can isolate ourselves from everybody else, because again, those voices, all the negative talk will only keep us in a loop of negativity. And that negativity, sometimes people don't want to even be around us. Even if we want to be around people, some people don't want to be around that negativity. And some people might voice it, might say it, might bring it up. And we might not want to hear that, right? Because sometimes we are so unaware of what we're doing. When other people bring it up, it can be more like they are criticizing me. And we tend probably not to take it easily or kindly. So we tend to probably isolate ourselves from those people. And then we end up feeling, oh, I'm not worthy of happiness, because of the negative talk and all that. And then again, so we have to be mindful that it's not necessarily just the guilt. It's more like also all the other things that come with it. But if we do not heal it, it's very much detrimental to us because it comes with so many other things. Because when I started talking about it as just guilt, it's like, oh, okay, that can be, then we can deal with that easily. But then when we start looking at it in a broader spectrum with all the other things that come with it, we have to see also that it's not just guilt. It's more like all the associated symptoms, or all the associated, I would say, woundings that come with it too. And that can amplify our trauma if it's not really addressed. And so just to make sure that we understand that, we have to go back in time. When it comes to addressing it, the guilt, we have to go back in time and investigating, like, what happened. If it happened, what event specifically triggered that guilt? It can be childhood trauma, it can be childhood experiences, it can be, like I was talking about, the traumatic events. If it was an accident, we have to go back in time and investigate and see, when did it start? When did it start, right? For us to be able to even know what it is specifically, for us to even name it, we have to be able to say, hey, I'm feeling a certain way, but when did it start? Going back in time, trying to see, investigating to see, when did it start? Once we understand where it started, then that will actually help us better understand how to address it, how to be able to see all the other components that come with it, and how to address. And once we know those components, it's also easier to see what kind of therapy modalities to apply to it to help us in our healing journey. Because not all healing modalities actually are helpful for any and everything, right? So we have to be mindful that if specific healing modalities are so much better for specific traumatic events, especially if it comes to PTSD. If we have PTSD, we have to be mindful, since PTSD, if that person went through a traumatic accident and they have survivor's remorse, we have to be able to understand that, okay, that guilt started around that time, so therefore it must be probably PTSD. If they go to a healthcare professional, they diagnose the PTSD, they'll be able to help them address the anxiety that comes with it, the flashbacks, the insomnia, the depression, right? Through medication, for sure. And also through therapy, right? Group therapy, individual therapy. They'll be able to do different things to help them at least address some of the things that come with that PTSD over time, right? Until they see the results that they actually want, or that helps them function on a daily basis, especially if it's one of those traumatic events that hinder the daily life, right? We cannot really do what we're supposed to do on a daily basis. And those traumatic events, for sure, we have to be able to go back in time, for sure, to know. Knowing is one of the most important. The awareness of the when, the how, the what. When, how, what, right? What happened? When did it happen? What happened at the time? And then be able to address it from there. The components, for sure, once we know that, it's easy enough for us to just unravel all the little pieces and see how to address each piece separately if needed, right? And the coping strategies, there are so many different coping strategies, and those coping strategies will depend, of course, on a different type of trauma that we have sustained that triggered the guilt. Now, if again it's one of those traumatic events that trigger the PTSD, there are so many different coping mechanisms for PTSD, and those coping mechanisms allow us to understand, number one, the triggers. If we know the triggers, then we can use the coping mechanism to silence the triggers. So that's the biggest thing. So we have to be mindful that, again, and the guilt, we have to be understanding that the self-blame is not the way to go, right? Blaming ourselves all the time, every time, about what happened, what did that happen, that's not the way to go. Making sure that we silence those voices, all the negative talk, making sure we silence that by affirming to ourselves. As soon as we start negatively talking to ourselves, snap out of it, right? Let's tell ourselves, nope, I'm gonna snap out of it so that I can actually go back thinking positively. Snap out of it. And being aware that we're doing it, that's the number one thing. Once we're aware of it, then it's easier enough to catch ourselves doing it, snapping out of it, and replacing it with affirmations, telling ourselves, no, 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 I'm not going to do this. I am going to be okay. I am going to do positive things. I am going to find positive actions to replace these negative thoughts. I am going to be good. Tomorrow is going to be a good day, or today going to be a good day. Whatever specific negative thought process we have in a loop, being able to replace it with the opposite as an affirmation, as a positive thought instead, right? So that's the key. Being able to not just negatively talking to ourselves all the time, and replacing that. Now, I'll go ahead and actually stop it here. Oh, and the next thing is making sure that we don't isolate, because in any traumatic event that is associated with negative talk, the worst we can do is self-isolation. Because once we isolate ourselves, we provide our mind the space and time to be consumed with those negative thought process. The negative thought process will consume our mind. The self-isolation will trigger us to go into depression eventually, right? So the negative thought processes will take over our mind, over our thought process completely, and we can end up being depressed and probably anxious too, because once we self-isolate, we isolate ourselves for so long, we end up being agoraphobic eventually. Not wanting to be outside, not wanting to be around people, being afraid even of the crowd, not wanting to be, just being afraid of the crowd, being afraid of people, being afraid of gathering, being afraid of, grocery stores. So we have to be mindful that, again, isolation is good enough up to a certain extent, because again, we need to have that space for ourselves to be able to listen to our mind, ourselves, and isolating ourselves a little bit every day is a good thing. But then when we go to anything overdoing it is bad. So when we overdo isolation, it's the same thing. And in the case of guilt, right, that comes with trauma, that can actually be one of the big ones too, because we feel so guilty to be around the people that we feel like we have done wrong to, or we blame ourselves for something wrong have been done to them, right? Which is sometimes the false responsibility. We're not responsible for what happened to people, unfortunately, right? Or what the people did to us. We're not responsible for that. But if we have that false responsibility, we tend to take other people's actions as our own when they're not, right? They're not our actions. We did not do that to ourselves. Other people did that, and that's their actions, not ours. And we didn't do nothing that made us being worthy, or being worthy of what they have done to us, or being, just being worthy of what they have done to us. We did not do much of anything for them to do that to us. So there's no need for us to blame ourselves for what they have done. Those are their actions, not ours. So I'll go ahead and stop it here. And in every video, I will say this: please take care of yourself, making sure that you do your daily walks, your yoga, meditation, having to talk to people who elevate you, who uplift you, right? That's something that for sure. And even if you don't have people around you who uplift you, making sure that you do something that uplifts you. If it's listening to music, if it's dancing, if it's watching comedy shows, right? Like in Europe, there are several countries actually that have laughing clubs, right? Where people just sign up to go laugh, and it's laughing about nothing, literally. Just sit down and laugh. There's no joke, there's no nothing. It's like, so one person starts laughing, the coach starts laughing, and everybody follows laughing, and they just laugh and laugh and laugh for minutes at a time, right? And it's actually good for us. It triggers our body to produce endorphins, to release endorphins, which is those hormones that make us feel good. Like the same as when we go to the gym, when we work out, we have endorphins. And it makes us feel good. Laughing does that too. So we have to make sure that we use things that actually uplift us, makes us feel good. Like self-care, right? Doing our nails. We don't need to go to a pedicure, manicure place to spend hundreds of dollars to do that. We can buy a $2 bottle at the store, and do our own nails, right? We can do things. And self-care, I don't know, mask, facial mask for the ladies, even for the men, you can do a facial mask, right? You can do all of that. So, it's like there are so many things that we can do that are not money necessarily, they do not really require so much money for us to spend. It's something as simple as $10, going to the Dollar Tree, getting a couple things for self-care for the month, right? And taking care of ourselves, making sure that, we have a bubble bath for $1 something at Dollar Tree. We can get a huge bottle of the bubble bath or Walmart, or, simple things that we can do to actually just feel good about our day. A bubble bath once a month, once a week, once every 2 weeks, right? We can kind of switch up our self-care. It doesn't mean that we have to do the same thing over and over. We can just switch it up. We can do something different every week or something, that can actually just uplift us. And then making sure that we eat healthy, of course, balanced meals, fruits, veggies, sleep enough, 7 hours or more, and making sure that we do our journaling if we journal. If not, that's okay too, whatever we do. And there are so many things that I have not mentioned that, depending on, again, where you are, if you live in a city where you have actually the ocean or a beach, you can go to the beach, right? Just put your feet in the water, right? And there are so many things, right? So many things I have not mentioned also. But the key is here for us to find something that works for us, right? Because again, the same thing, healing is not cookie cutter. The same way self-care is not cookie cutter. Mindfulness is not cookie cutter. The healing modalities are not cookie cutter. So the healing modalities, things that we use to heal, like therapy and so many different things that we use, it's not cookie cutter, right? Depending on what kind of trauma we sustain, it requires different things for us to actually do, for us to get to that healing part of the making sure that we do what we need to do at the end of the day that works for us. That's the biggest thing. That's the key. Okay, so I'll go ahead and say I'll stop it here. So please, until next time, take care of yourself. Bye-bye.